We've got two presentations today. In a short while we're going to hear from a collaboration between Pedal and Nesta from three of my colleagues. But before that we've got Rob Hughes who's going to talk about Tandem, which I know tiny little bits about, but I'm really excited to hear more about. So I'm not going to do any more introduction for Rob. He's a kind of friend of Pedal and a colleague of Pedal and has worked in lots of different ways in interaction with us on different kinds of projects and discussions. And I'm really looking forward to what he has to say. So over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Paul. I thought that was just a fun way to introduce it. The interesting fact to go alongside watching that video is that video was both won lots of advertising awards in South Africa for being incredibly successful, and was pulled in response to complaints by Linda Richter and colleagues in South Africa around the message this was sending about kind of the next generation and our use of technology. And it really sets the scene because it's sort of part of how and why I ended up here with a sort of slightly uncomfortable tech bro hat on, because actually part of my time in the week is spent at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine as a assistant professor there, but actually I'm here as a tech startup trying to actually build technology, and I'll explain a bit about why and how. So I'm going to talk quite quickly. I'm going to try and give us a quick whistle stop of kind of why and how and what we're building in Tandem, so that we can have a bit of a conversation about it and I can hear your thoughts and reactions. So I'll talk quickly, but feel free to shout and jump in and whatever else. It's all about human interaction is the point. So why are we building Tandem? This audience, I don't need to spend a long time on this, but essentially there's three kind of key starting points for us. One is that parental interaction, human interaction, is critical in early childhood. We all know that. Everyone knows it's good to not be sick. Don't be sick. Have a good enough nutrition, but also have enough interaction. Secondly, it's about inequality. We know that that's this period where inequality is embedded in those early years. Louise did a wonderful keynote earlier. We've heard about that throughout the day. And thirdly, technology is increasingly pervasive in the early years. But as I think is exemplified by that advert, which represents quite a reality for many people, technology is not really good enough, and that's our take. Children are being served poorly by the industry. I do want to say in a session about reading, we at Tandem love books. And by that I mean the physical dead tree books. We love books. Books and reading are brilliant. We see what we're trying to do is about encouraging and enabling more people to read. Now there's a role for digital in that, but we see that as about having a spillover into books. So we're not in competition with libraries. In fact, we are. I'm speaking at the London Libraries Conference on Friday precisely because we're all about books. We're about interaction. But going back to screen time, so we're seeing this really radical change in the role of digital devices in young people's lives. Ofcom data suggests it's 3 to 5 year olds spending 3 hours a day on screens, even 2 to 4 year olds spending 2.5 hours a day. We're seeing the online activities as mostly about watching and quite passive behaviours. And Nesta have done some really good work on this, really looking across the suite of apps that are in the market, really giving us quite a rich understanding. And what we've found is that most apps are really poor quality. Only a quarter of the apps actually target parents. Very few of them think about parents and children, or none of them. And lots of them are stuffed full of adverts and really not great. So there's also a reality of the fact people are using these apps, and YouTube Kids is the fastest growing bit of YouTube globally. It's because it's meeting a need that parents have and they see. It's giving them something they want in that place, time. It's sort of digital dummies. So that's all informing a little bit of how and why we're building Tandem. So in terms of moving on to how we're building Tandem, really I think this is where the tech bro and the academic hat sit really well, because actually the vision's exactly the same. The vision is about a world where every child gets a fair start in life. And really what we're trying to do, and this is our kind of leading light, is enable every child to experience those early interactions that set them up for life. That said, we're sort of borrowing from academia and from industry in terms of how we approach it. So yes, we like the kind of move fast of the tech industry, but we also like the kind of let's think ethically and don't break children. You've got to be really careful. One of the reasons we're working how we are working and who we're working with is because this is high stakes stuff. What we're actually doing in terms of at Tandem is we're trying to really focus initially on three things. One is the children aged 3 to 5 is our broad focus. We think there will be younger children who use the platform we're building, and we think there will be older ones, but that's the biggest opportunity we see. Really, we're focusing on regular, high quality and shared reading. And some of the work we've been doing with Nesta has been about both encouraging more reading in families, but actually for many of the families, it's about initiation and doing some reading. So it's doing some and doing more. And thirdly, it's about building strong relationships. So for us, what we're trying very hard to do is to build technology that optimizes for stronger relationships, more interaction, not time on the screen, and I'll talk a bit about how that works. We have a very long-term sort of vision that's different channels, different tools, different kind of interactions. But at the moment, we're starting with a phone and tablet, a phone or tablet app, and I can do a quick demo if we have time. As I mentioned, we're trying to borrow from academia and industry. So this is a sort of slightly, this is how we're aiming to be, in that we're looking and saying, well, within academia, there's brilliant things around kind of how we think about ethics. Sometimes they're a bit slow, but the principles are the right. We think about inequality, how we think about science and being scientifically informed, and privacy and things like that. Equally, there's things that when you think like an industry and you think like a business, that you do much, much better than academics. So you think big and you think about scale, and you have to think about scaling your users. And you also do borrow from science a bit, but you're probably concerned less about equity and inequality, certainly if you're funded by most normal funders who are mostly concerned about making money. And so for us, we're trying to blend those two. So in terms of what we're actually building at Tandem, we see this, and I'll do a demo that'll make this a bit more make sense, but broadly what we're doing is thinking about 3 different ways that a child might interact with technology, that an adult might interact with technology, and that an adult and child might interact with technology. We're quite simple, so we talk about A, B, and C. Adults, C for child, and B for both. And on the front end, what that looks like from how the interaction works is that for the adult, it's about they register, they review, they get their access to the data. We're quite explicit about what data we collect and why, and I'll come to explain more about that in a minute. We will be building in more sort of tracking of that child over time, so you get a sense, you get something back as a parent, and a platform for other kind of parenting information. And then I'm going to go sort of A, C, B, if that's all right. I do know my ADC. C is the creating or child mode. So then what the platform allows is it uses generative AI to allow a young child with a parent or on their own, and we're interested in both those kind of users, to generate a picture book, an illustrated picture book that they want to read. So they can decide if they're in the picture book, they can set whether it's in their town, in their park, in a tree, in space, in whatever. They can choose the objects, they can choose whether this is a bedtime story or a story that makes them jump around, or a story that makes them laugh and play. So they have some agency over that, is the idea. And then the other piece is the interactive shared reading activity. And within that, there's another sort of technological piece, which is that we track that interactivity in a very explicit, honest way, where we say, if you'd like to, we can use, initially we're focused on audio data, but we can use the device to actually track the interaction in a similar way to the Lena device that people may be familiar with. So we can track the words spoken by each person, we can track the linguistic turns and the serve and return interactions. We can look at how many words from within the story are read, but also words from outside the story, and we can track all of those and use that to then inform the adult mode and send you a text message later in the evening saying, brilliant reading today, you've read 3 times this week, this is great for your child, and here's why. Or we can say, that's great you've read today, what about asking some questions around the story? So we can sort of give little nudges that are informed by their behaviour. In the back end, just to think about the technology, we're interested in building in things like the global scales for early development, so parent-reported data to actually track interactions over time. In the child mode, we're using essentially an increasingly fine-tuned kind of general-purpose language model and generative image generation and sound generation models to generate those stories for children. And there's quite a lot to that. Increasingly, we can talk about the tech if it's useful, but we're increasingly thinking about sort of agentic models, so multiple agents. We have the storyteller, we have the illustrator, and we have the nanny who checks the content before it gets served to the child and checks the so it's quite sophisticated in the back end. And then in the interaction, we're looking at using initially audio data, but eventually using the front-facing camera, we could look at things like reciprocal movement and interaction. And really, the idea is that all of that kind of connects together to build a picture up of that child, that adult, and that dyad, really, over time. And really the aim here is that we displace some of that passive use of screen time you saw in that opening video. We convert that into something that's active and interactive. We connect what might be a solo activity, make some of it a tandem activity, but connect it to that shared reading activity. And we also adapt to that child over time and learn how they're interacting, how their reading is developing, how their relationship is developing. And all of that really fundamentally is about strengthening those relationships. At the center of all this is kind of the really clever piece, which is this idea of a kind of reasoning engine. So it's not just about sort of wrapper for an AI thing. It's actually about a reasoning engine that goes all the way down from the sort of individual task execution of why don't you send a text this evening to congratulate this parent for reading today, all the way through to the high level where you sort of set the aspiration and determine what the point of Tandem is, what the point of these technologies are. And this point of how we're building it is really why we got into this space, because technology is being developed for the next generation. And my co-founder and I felt we tried working with Google actually for 6 months, and we couldn't actually get enough traction there. And it wasn't, we can go into that in Q&A if it's useful, but we actually ended up thinking, well, you've got to build the technology to try and determine where it's going. Super quickly, I mean, we're about a bit over a year into this sort of proper journey of building it. We've got a working prototype that we've been, as I say, mentioned, collaborating with Nesta and others on testing and looking at different use cases. We're really getting ready to start thinking about launching, adapting, thinking about different use cases. I'll do a super quick demo in a second. Before I do, and I'm conscious of a bit of time, Paul's going to keep I think we're okay on time. Are we all right? Until 20 past, aren't we? Just to compare and contrast, the book, again, a bit like academia and industry, I think there's things that Tandem and platforms like Tandem can be that are similar to books, and there's things that are really different. So we can't be very tactile. We can do some things actually with haptic feedback, but we can't be very tactile. Books can be incredibly tactile. Books are sometimes age appropriate, hopefully. In an ideal world, every child has the books that they're sort of matching where they are developmentally. But we can do that, and actually we think we can do that in real time. So we can almost have it that if a child's reading very fluently, we can make the next page a little bit more complex or throw in some different words. If the child's really stumbling, we could dial down the complexity of the language. For now, we're doing that manually, so the parent has a sort of volume control where they can dial down or dial up. But eventually, we think that could be a real-time adaptation that's just really meeting that child where they are. We've got all sorts of ideas about how books can be kind of current and really resonate with people, both parents and adults. If the parent's really into the Olympics and wants a story about the Olympics, or if the child is, you could make one about the Olympics, or whatever it is. There's something that's sort of topical or on. You can kind of do that in a way that books, it's harder with books. One of the really interesting things we've learned from the work with Nesta has been around kind of cultural adaptation, and actually what we found, and particularly looking at the low-income families that Nesta's obviously focused on, is that they don't necessarily resonate with the books that are in the library or the books that the school gives them. They don't see people like them and cultures that they are bringing, particularly if they're in diverse populations. Whereas with this, we very quickly can build into multi-languages for input and output in terms of stories, and also more than languages. We can put different cultures, references that are quite fun as well. And there's this concept of being self-made that is different with Tandem. We're really interested in this idea of using tools and giving children the ability to sort of do some part of the creative process. And you know, it's complex. The ethics of all of this stuff actually is deeply complex around where the models are coming from. But we think there's something interesting about that. Super quickly on the team, I don't know, some of you may know Casper. My co-founder, Alistair van Heerden, has done all sorts of work on M-Health and community health in South Africa. We think this is a platform, we're starting thinking about the UK, but it's got a massive kind of global potential, particularly for places that have even more restricted access to kind of reading resources. We've also got brilliant sort of titles for people like our Chief Insights Officer, Casper Ademan, who's building our kind of interaction tracking. And we've got a head of stories, Lara, who's really helping us think through different stories and different use cases. And we're also doing very, very much focused on putting users in the heart of it. So I'm not going to go through this, but the point here is that you'll see on the right-hand side, we have an ethics committee that Sally's here. Sally's on, but others may know some of the others on that too. But we're really committed to, before we do anything, actually working in an ethical way and trying to borrow that piece of academia. We can maybe come back to that in the Q&A, but I've got a few conversation starters for you there. But before I finish, I just want to quickly give you a quick demonstration of how it actually works in real time. So you can add, I'll go back a second. So you can actually choose, you can add your children and family members into the app. And then if you choose, say my daughter's called Lola, you can create a story. And at the moment, we've got a very simple, you can create it in multiple languages. This is just some examples, but probably safest for this audience to do English, at least for me. And you can choose what type of story you want to make. What do you want it to do? Let's have a move, dance, sing, or be silly. And you follow, at the moment, we're actually about to sort of redesign the app in the way that you do if you're building tech things. But at the moment, it's a very simple, linear kind of story flow. You can choose who's going to be in that story. Are we going to have a sea monster? Do you want to be in the story? You can say yes or no. and you can choose what sort of objects you want to be in the story. And I've got the sounds off at the moment, but we've got it that just to give an example, each of these, when you press on them, it'll say the word, but it'll say the word in a diverse set of accents, and it's all generative language as well. But you can choose the accents it's saying in, so you can sort of just resonate with people again. Let's have a banana. And you can choose where you set your story. And then essentially what we've done, once we've chosen that and the setting and the style of images, that is now essentially sending it off to through that various sort of prompting engine into the cloud to generate that story. Now it takes a little while while that's happening. So we're very explicit, and we've built in a kind of, this is a bit clunky, but it's very explicit. We're telling people that the story robots are making the story. We're not pretending that it's, there's something important about being honest about these sort of processes. And then we have a little game while you keep busy, and I'm absolutely terrible at doing these. I have no short-term memory. Someone's going to be watching and thinking he's in. Anyway, you'll get the idea. No, I don't have no. It's one of these games where you can't help, but if you've seen it, you're like, oh, jeez, bloody that. Oh no, I can't do it. Anyway, you'll get the idea. It takes. At the moment, we've just reduced the time down on most, depending on how busy the servers that we're using for the different models. It takes about 30 to 40 seconds most of the time to generate a story. So we don't want it to be any shorter than that, because we think it's quite important there isn't an instant gratification, but we're pretty happy with that pace that you can kind of keep people's interest in it. So it'll be ready in a second, but look, that's lucky. Really luck. Random chance is our friend sometimes. So it should be like, I know. It's painful to watch, isn't it? It's even more painful to be doing it. We'll maybe come back to this in the end in the thing, but I think some of the questions that are really on our mind is, what are the use cases for this in different populations? What are the ones where this is really going to deliver social impact? And actually, the other thing we have to think about, and we do try and think about, is what the ones that have kind of viable business model here cost quite a lot to build these things. We're quite frugal, but it still does cost quite a lot. What are the right business models is something we've been thinking through. Really, it's been incredibly helpful working with Nesta again to look at these different communities that might be able to pay for those who wouldn't pay. We're not interested in building this just for those who already have a bookshelf of books and a parent who reads every night. We want to build this for those cases where people are not necessarily reading. What collaborations make the most sense for us, academia, service delivery organisations, policymakers? We're trying to be sort of front-footed around things like regulation. We think we're building it as if the regulation existed, but it doesn't actually at the moment for this sort of stuff. And then finally, how might data and insights generated through platforms like this support both development of these types of tools, but also other services? For example, if we had a child using this for a couple of years and then they're starting school, it would be very, very easy to get a pretty accurate reading age for that school and a few more insights into that child and their interests that might help with things like school transitions and school readiness. So I will stop there because I've had the 1 minute flag. But that was meant to be my thank you to Louise and the team for Nesta, who've been brilliant collaborators on this, doing exactly what I asked Louise this question this morning about how can Nesta help with sort of influence technology development. I think this is a really nice example of that. But I will stop there. Thank you.